Hi again. Sometimes when you work on specifically larger applications, it makes sense that you break your storyboards into several different files. Let's say your application has 10 different views and every view has some, supporting UI views and whatnot. And for that, it really is, better if you actually have more than one storyboard. And if you have that, we have to learn how to segue between not just the view controllers of the same storyboard, but rather the view controllers of multiple storyboards. I'm going to show you two different ways. One of them is purely based on the interface, and the other one is with some programmatic approaches as well. So let's have a look at both of them. I'm going to go to Xcode. I'm going to start a new application called Segue to Storyboard UI in the user interface, not with programming. So here I'm going to go to my storyboard and I'm going to assume that I have one button, and this button is supposed to take us to another storyboard and within there another view controller. So my button says go to next, and it has a different background such as this one. Now I need another storyboard file. So to do that, I'm going to say file, new file. And in here, I'm going to choose a storyboard. I'm going to say this is next, and I'm actually going to call it next storyboard. So next.storyboard. So now this is a storyboard that doesn't have anything in it, but what I do need is a view controller. So I have a view controller in my new storyboard, and maybe this view controller has the same green color. And this is now supposed to be my green view controller where I want to go to. Of course, just like any other storyboard, you can have your view controller classes added in here. You can, for instance, have a Cocoa Touch class. Let's call it green view controller. And in your next, you can just connect it there, just like if you had it in any other storyboard, essentially. Once I have my view controller in the other storyboard taken care of, I'm going to head back to my main storyboard. And in here, I need a way to go from here to the previous storyboard. So to do that, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to add a different object that is called a Storyboard Reference. And that's essentially a way to providing a placeholder for a view controller in an external storyboard. So I'm going to add that, and that's a reference to another storyboard. So for that, I'm going to go in here in the attributes and say the storyboard I want to get a reference to is actually next. And then it's telling me, so which referenced ID do you want to use? Which view controller is the ID for the view controller you want to go to? And that's something I haven't set yet. So I'm going to go to my next storyboard again, select my view controller and say this view controller actually has an storyboard ID. So let me come in here, zoom into this area and say this view controller has an storyboard ID that is called green VC ID. So I'm going to copy that name, go to my main storyboard again, select my reference and say from next, I want to get this one, green VC ID. And then everything is as usual. I could just select the green button, hold the control and draw a new segue, say present modally. The reason I'm doing modally and not show is because I don't have a navigation controller. So I'm going to say present modally, and maybe in my modal I'm going to change the transition type. I'm going to say it is a flip horizontal. And now everything is set for our application to essentially make a transition between one storyboard to another storyboard using a segue to the reference storyboard. If I press on the green now, we essentially get navigated to the storyboard of the other file. And from this point on, we are essentially here. We are within the next storyboard and we can do whatever we wanted to do in here. Keep in mind that when you did the reference in the main storyboard here, if I actually cut this for a second, it says what is the initial view controller of the other storyboard. So that's the initial one that will land in there, and then you can do whatever you want to do from that point on. So that was one way of doing it. That is essentially doing everything in the interface builder. Now I'm going to show you another way of doing the same thing, but this time we're going to do it entirely programmatically. So I'm going to start a new application. Let's call this one Segue to another Storyboard Programmatic. It's a long name for an application, but still. So I have my main storyboard. It has a white background and hopefully a button soon. I have a new storyboard file, Command N storyboard. This is called the next, just like the last time. Within my next, I have a view controller. This view controller, I'm going to make it look green perhaps, so we can actually see it more distinctly. So that's green. And the very same process that we did last time in terms of setting titles and IDs, we have to do it in here as well. So once again, I'm going to select my green view controller, go in here and say a storyboard ID for it is green view controller ID. I'm going to copy that name. And then I'm going to go to my main storyboard and have a button. I'm going to say that button is placed in here. Actually, let it have some constraints so it doesn't look as ugly as usual. 400, not a width, no, but 20. Okay. And then my button is going to have a background that is also green and says go to green. And of course, I have to add a function for this button. So I'm going to load up my assistant window. And in my assistant window, I'm going to say, I don't need the view did load, but I do need is an action. And that action is saying, go to green action. Now, everything that we have to actually do programmatically happens within here. And this is actually kind of important because from time to time, you end up using this system as opposed to doing everything in the interface builder. So the first thing I have to do is I have to get access to my next storyboard. So I'm going to say let next storyboard. That's going to become UI storyboard. And I'm going to make it using a name within a bundle. For the bundle, I have an L, so it refers to the current bundle. And the name of it is obviously next, because that's the name we gave to our storyboard. So now we have our storyboard taken care of. The next thing we need is we need to find our view controller. So I'm going to say let next view controller. That's still becoming next storyboard dot instantiate view controller with identifier. And the identifier for it was green VC ID. So I'm essentially saying, let me format this better. I'm saying get the next view controller, find the view controller that has the ID green VC ID and place it in next VC. And once I have that, that's very simple from this point on. I can simply say self-present view controller, or if I wanted to, I could actually use a navigation controller, which is what I want to do in here. So let's change a little thing as well. So let's go ahead to our main storyboard and say we also have a navigation controller. And that's a good reminder of how we do that. So editor, embed in a navigation controller. So by default, our white view controller, our main view controller is within a navigation controller. And this is how we essentially go to a navigation controller's upcoming view controllers. I'm going to say self.navigation controller .push view controller. And what am I pushing? Next VC. Is it animated? Of course it is. And now if I run the application, it's essentially going to go find the storyboard, find the view controller, and push the navigation controller into that view controller. Let's see if that is what as I'm suggesting. I had to go to green and perfect. We end up in here using a navigation controller essentially format. Once again, I press that, we end up in the green of the next storyboard, not even within our own storyboard, and I've hit the back button and we end up within the original storyboard. A very handy solution for a lot of situations where we end up designing our app in multiple storyboards. And that's very useful when you're working with a team of people or if your application is just very, very large. So let's keep all of this in mind and move on to our next lesson.